Okay guys, so with the prices of brand new components still being very expensive, a lot of people are looking out there on the used market. So I've decided to put together a system that kind of represents a good balance all round and something that most people can actually afford. But don't let its modern looks fool you, because what's inside of this system is actually pretty old. And of course, we want to see how well it games still in 2025 and what kind of experience we're going to get. Now, in the recent past, we've looked at many systems, but anything that's generally pre-2020 have generally been AMDs. But I've actually put a system together here that has no AMD at all in it. We are talking about an Intel processor with an Nvidia graphics card, something that would have been extremely popular all the way back in around 2018. That is roughly from the year when these components were created. So will it actually game okay in 2025? Well, that is the big question. Contrary to popular belief, AMD were not that popular back in 2018. It was just the time when Ryzen was first being born, but Intel still had some great offerings. Nvidia was still dominating the market. In particular, the graphics card we got today would have been something that a lot of people really wanted. The platform that we've got in this system is from Intel's 9th generation, and for the CPU, we've got the Intel Core 9600K. That is an overclockable processor, and it has 6 cores and 6 threads. Probably not the greatest thing nowadays, considering how many cores and threads you get for not a lot of money, but this thing would have been reasonably expensive and actually quite powerful as well for its time. That CPU is sitting in an MSI Z390 Tomahawk motherboard. That was actually one of the most expensive parts for me to pick up for this system. It is a pretty decent board, and it was very high end for the day, and it's got lots and lots of different features, which is one of the reasons I picked it up. But it probably doesn't make any kind of financial sense to do that nowadays, unless you can get a very cheap board, because you can get new boards for about the price that I actually paid for this second-hand one. But at least it's going to give us the chance to test these kind of CPUs out and build systems just like this one. We are also running 32 gigabytes of Trident Z RAM. That is only 3200 megahertz, which would have been pretty fast back in 2018. And it also has a 1 terabyte NVMe drive. Of course, that is only running in PCI Gen 3 because that was the speeds of the time, but this motherboard does come with 2 NVMe slots, so at least we can always double up on the storage if we want to. The shining star of the entire system is of course this graphics card, and this is the Nvidia Geforce RTX 2080. It is a Zotac gaming amp model, which I believe is the amp extreme, so it's a very nice model. It's got lots and lots of RGB, and the triple fan configuration actually keeps it extremely cool, and it uses 2 8-pin connections, so you will need a pretty decent power supply here. We are currently running a 750 watt power supply in here, but I think you could probably get away with something like a 650. That would be perfectly fine, and the graphics card runs beautifully as well. This entire system is wrapped up in the Wizmax Artrian case. It is a case that Wizmax actually sent across to us, so I want to thank them for that to do this exact build. You've got some fantastic features on it, including the full bottom shroud here for your power supply. It came with 4 fans, although the front ones are non-RGB, they're just black fans, but the back one does have a little bit of ARGB lighting. I actually like this case because it comes with some pretty decent premium features, which I didn't really expect when it actually came up. The front panel has this real modern, sleek, ventilated look with different colors. I really do like the front of that case. It makes it look extremely sophisticated. And then when you come to some of the additional features like the ventilation on the top, you do have this kind of dust filtering on the top, but it is made in a metal. It actually kind of locks into the top of the case. It's not one of those magnetic things. All you do is it kind of locks down into the top of the case, and then you use a thumb screw at the back. It also comes with a glass door, which actually is on hinges, so you can just slot the door on and hinge the door back and forward. I really like them. I think they look really cool, and they're really beneficial to anybody out there that likes to kind of keep their systems clean, because it makes it really easy to do that, as well as providing any kind of upgrades. For additional cooling, you can also install up to a 360mm radiator in the top, something like an all-in-one cooler, as well as in the front, or a 240mm in the back panel, which is giving you plenty of space to kind of do that with. Unfortunately, we can't put anything in that back panel because of the size of our graphics card, but if you had something smaller, it would actually fit very well. You can also fit up to 2 120mm fans on the bottom here, so we can actually provide extra air into the graphics card if needed. Not that we needed it with this actual graphics card, and it's got plenty of space from this panel here to the power supply to be able to draw enough air through as well. So The case actually really does go to show you how you can completely modernize an older system like this. The parts inside of here are all about 7 years old. The case is reasonably new and it's really kind of brought everything back to life. I've also used an air cooler, which for those of you that watch many of our videos, I don't do that often. I just thought it would really actually kind of go with the time that this system was actually built, and it was pretty fun kind of putting it together. It's a very basic up here cooler and it performs exceptionally well, particularly for the 9600K. But of course, we want to see how well this system games in 2025. Can we actually play super modern titles, things that are brand new? We are limited with some of the components in here, of course, only having a 6-core 6-thread processor in 2025. It's not kind of the heard about thing. And also this graphics card, even though it is an RTX card, so we should have the technology to play new games, it does only come with 8GB of VRAM, and we know games are kind of pushing that limit nowadays, particularly if you want to play in anything over 1080p with a high preset. So I suppose what we need to do now is go hook the system up and take a look at some games. So I really like the way that this system has turned out. I don't generally build with Intel and Nvidia, particularly when we're talking about budgets or older builds, because AMD has always just had the best price to performance, but I thought I would give it a little bit of a chance, and so far it's actually been quite impressive. The graphics card looks amazing in the system. The CPU is just extremely stable and can perform very well in Windows. It's still very nippy even today, even with just that 6-core and 6-thread, and it looks fantastic in this case. I'm so glad that Wizmax sent this case across, because I do really think that it completely modernized the system and makes it look a little bit more premium, a little bit more professional, and that's what some people would have liked to do. Some people would suggest that this CPU and graphics card wouldn't be the normal pairing, but in fact there was a lot of people that actually built this kind of thing, and that's because CPUs were always generally stronger. It's a mid-range CPU that is overclockable. They weren't cheap and things like that. And then kind of overdoing it on the graphics card was always good, because it meant you could get some super good performance out of it, and it would last you a few generations. Anyone building this system in 2018 would have actually been hugely appreciative after that, because we hit the GPU crisis where you just couldn't buy any kind of graphics card at all, and this RTX 2080 would have actually kept you going all the way through. That was if you didn't sell it, because they got to extreme prices during that time, so you could have made a bit of a pretty penny on it as well. But the system is up and running, it looks fantastic, and of course we're going to try some games on it. One of the games that we're going to test first is Cyberpunk 2077. It should be reasonably easy for this graphics card and CPU. We're going to stick to 1080p, and we're going to see what kind of experience people would have got with this game, because it was and still is a very popular game today. Now, while the game is loading up, there is one thing that I can point out about this system. Because of that CPU, loading times are not the fastest. We have an NVMe drive, we've got 32 gigs of RAM, which would have been reasonably fast for its time, and probably lots of people still use that RAM, but it kind of takes a while to get through things, and sometimes you do get the little Windows curly thing waiting for things to load. I can only put that down to the CPU, to be honest, because there's nothing else really in the system that's holding it back. But the game is now actually loaded. We're getting some pretty decent performance in the menu system, so we'll just go into here. Before we start the game, we'll head over to the settings. We'll see what we've got configured. It is currently running in 1440p, so we will drop that to 1080p. We'll apply that setting. We'll go over to our graphics detail here, and what we're going to do is we're going to set it to a high setting, no help from DLSS or anything. We'll try something a little bit native first and see what kind of performance we get, and then maybe we'll push it up a little bit. Maybe we'll do a little bit of ray tracing, because we do have an RTX card. But let's go and start the game. So with a game like this, I would actually be more than happy with a 60 FPS experience, particularly in 1080p. At the moment, we are currently getting an average of around 96, 95 frames per second with a 1% low of 60. That would be beautifully smooth enough for me, particularly if I just locked it down to 60 FPS with VSync or something. And 1080p is probably not the best resolution that you would want if you can kind of get that performance, but of course we want to bump these settings up a little bit, so we're going to leave it in 1080p. Everything seems to be running reasonably smooth, although our 1% lows are dipping here to around 43, mostly because of that CPU. The CPU is bottlenecking out here at around 97% utilization, but only allowing the graphics card to get to around 60-70%. So of course this is where we're seeing that weakness in the i5. Again, it still means that the game is more than playable, and there's always going to be some kind of bottleneck in the system, particularly if you're building something old like this. I'm sure with an i7, maybe we'd get better performance, and maybe that's something we will do in the future. But for now, we're going to head back over to the settings. We're going to try a little bit of ray tracing. Let's set this game to a let's say ray tracing low setting, maybe. Actually, what we'll do is we'll go to a high setting. We'll turn off the resolution scaling. We're going to turn on ray tracing manually, and then we're going to turn a few things on. Let's turn on reflections. Let's turn on shadows. Let's turn on local shadows. We're not going to touch path tracing today because that's just a little bit silly, but we're going to turn lighting on, and we're going to go to an ultra setting. Let's apply that, see how well our performance really dives with this system. So of course, enabling ray tracing even on an RTX card, the RTX 2080, we've seen a dramatic drop in our performance. We are currently now getting an average of 33 frames per second with a 1% low of 26. Some people out there would still say that that is more than playable, but to be honest, you can just tell the difference on the screen. Everything is a little bit more stuttery, everything's a little bit more blurry. So what we'll do is we'll see what kind of other tools and fancies this card actually has. One of the biggest benefits of going Nvidia, of course, is DLSS. It's one of the best technologies for upscaling. So let's head back into the settings. We'll go to our graphics. We'll go to this resolution scaling here, and of course we're going to turn on DLSS super resolution. We're going to go for the transformer model, and what we're going to do is we're going to turn this on to probably a balance setting. If you do have an older system like this, of course you're going to have to tweak some settings and you're going to have to make some sacrifices, but DLSS is very good. So hopefully in a balanced setting, it's not going to ruin too much of the picture quality, and we're going to see some of that ray tracing beauty actually come out. So let's apply those settings and get back into game. So we have actually, it's looking fantastic, I will admit. DLSS is absolutely fantastic. We are currently now getting an average of 59 frames per second with a 1% low of 42. We have all the fancy reflections on, it looks beautiful, everything's looking good. Of course, normal quality of standing still doesn't really make that much of a difference, but as we move, we can start to see things in the reflections, in the way that lighting works. So this is actually pretty impressive now. 60 FPS on average with a 1% low of 42. So if you did have a system like this and you really wanted to play Cyberpunk, you're happy with 60 FPS, you can get away with it on this system. Again, now the CPU and the graphics card are a little bit more balanced now that we've actually adjusted these settings. We've got 90% utilization on the CPU and around 90% on the graphics card as well. Of course, that means they've got a little bit more left in them for both of them, but of course running them together is probably the issue that we've got. So now that we know that we can play Cyberpunk 2077 on an old system like this, and it plays beautifully fine, anybody out there with a system like this will get away with playing it and have a great time. We're going to try something quite a bit more demanding, and that game is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. The reason for this is because it is an RTX card. They sold you an RTX card, it does ray tracing. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle requires a hardware ray tracing card, which this one is. The whole system in general is above its minimum specs, so the game should start, but I'm not exactly sure what kind of performance we're going to get yet, because like I say, it is very demanding. But let's start the game and see what happens. So as this game's loading, like I say, just like Cyberpunk 2077, it takes a while to actually get through these loading screens. It's probably the CPU that's causing this more than anything. It's a little bit weak nowadays, although of course it's clearly still able to do that. But one thing that you're going to fall into, particularly on this game, is errors like this. Failed to allocate video memory, total allocation 8,171 megabytes. That's because the game was actually set into some kind of configuration before it started. So unfortunately, whatever it's configured to, we're not going to be able to play. We're going to have to alt tab out of this now to kind of get the game to close somehow. There you go, it's locked up. So we're going to say okay to that. That's actually going to get rid of the game. It's going to stop it. What we need to do is, as we start the game, we're going to have to launch it in safe mode. I think that just basically resets all of the graphic settings down to low, which means once we get in there, we're going to have to jump things around. And unfortunately, this is a game where you have to continuously keep restarting it. So it's probably going to take us a while to do this. I think the settings that it was previously set to were 1080p with a high preset, which is kind of crazy really, because that means that it just simply cannot start on an RTX 2080 with only 8 gigabytes of VRAM. But this is some of the issues that we're kind of falling into nowadays, particularly with these modern and super demanding games. But let's let the game start. It probably will put it into a completely low setting. We'll set it up to a medium and we'll kind of go from there and we'll see what performance we get. The game has finally started and we've managed to actually get into it this time. We'll head over to the settings and show you exactly what we did. No matter what we actually set in terms of a high setting across any of the graphical settings, it just simply wouldn't load. There is not enough VRAM here. We had to go for a medium across the board. We've got a video settings here. We're currently running in 1080p resolution. It's a good job we didn't try 1440p. We'll scroll down a little bit and we'll see that everything is currently set to a medium, and we have no kind of upscaling gone. Upscaling in this game will actually just kind of give you more performance more than anything, because again, simply just increasing those settings and then even trying to use upscaling, it just will not start because of that video memory. But let's have a look at how it performs in a medium setting. The game still looks gorgeous in that, and if we can get a 60 FPS experience, a nice crisp 60 FPS smooth experience, then of course this kind of system is still living today. But let's head back into game. Now that we're in the game, we are in Egypt here, one of the most demanding places of all. It's got some pretty decent view distances and a lot of things going on. We can see that we're currently getting an average of 95 frames per second with a 1% low of 61. That is pretty impressive, particularly for a system that you've had for 7 years now. We're still coming across, we're getting a little bit of jump in here and there on our frame time graph, but nothing that's really taken away from the game. We're still getting an average of 85 frames per second with a 1% low of around 56. This guy's going to spot me now, I'm going to have to run away. Trying to find somewhere a little bit more demanding. Obviously, with the more people around, the more demanding the game's going to be. But out here in the open, everything is looking good. Everything is running smooth. We've currently got a 97% utilization on our CPU, so at least that's doing some work now. And around a 90% utilization on the graphics card. Of course, we probably could get a little bit more performance out of it with a different CPU, something a little bit more powerful. But generally, again, we're still limited by the VRAM of this graphics card, particularly when it comes to the high fidelity settings. But it seems to be playing okay. I think you could get away with this on 60 FPS kind of gaming experience if you were to have an older system like this still, or if you built something like this, and you could still kind of play some of the latest and greatest games just like this one. This is probably one of the most demanding games that you can actually currently get because of its requirements. So it would be really interesting now to see what performance it gets across other games. Can we actually get other modern games to run perfectly fine on this one? Well, to find that out, let's take a look at some other benchmarks. Now, as you can see from those benchmarks, this system will actually perform exceptionally well, particularly with 1440p resolution on slightly older games and those that are not as demanding. You can get some pretty decent averages there of way above 60 FPS, but if you want to get into that high FPS experience, you really need to go down a resolution or start using some fancy tools like DLSS, frame generation, if you can with the AMD toolset, of course. You're going to get some pretty decent high FPS experiences with it. That means that this system is still kind of very capable in 2025. Anyone building this back in 2018, I think you got super lucky, even though you would have paid a pretty penny for it, because obviously we've gone through the GPU crisis. It would have kept you going through that. And even in 2025, it's still continuing to go and play brand new games even now. I'm not sure how far this system will go into the future. Of course, one of the upcoming games that I'm really excited about is something like Doom: The Dark Ages, and unfortunately that game does have a pretty decent requirement. Just to get something like a 1440p 60 FPS experience, you need over 10 gigabytes of VRAM, so clearly this card is going to start running out of steam very soon. But it was very limited by the CPU, of course, as we saw from the gameplay that we did. So I'm going to be testing this in our bench rig soon. That does have an AMD Ryzen 7 9800X3D. That thing should be able to cope with this graphics card perfectly fine, and we're really going to see what kind of performance this graphics card can get if it's got the best conditions. You won't want to miss that, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. And apart from that, let me know in the comments below what you think of this system, and I'm sure, as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one.